Spiritual Direction from Dante, Avoiding the Inferno, a book by Father Paul Pearson of the Oratory. Canto 4. Topics: God is at work in our lives. Spiritual blindness about our own faults. The potential goodness of human work. And yearning for more than this world can give. We might perceive that we are doing all the work in our spiritual life, that the burden of getting our act together falls entirely upon us. But, in fact, the greater part of the work is being done by God, even while we sleep. As it says in Psalm 127, "Unless the Lord watches over the city, the watchman stays awake in vain. It is in vain that you rise up early and go late to rest, eating the bread of anxious toil, for he gives to his beloved sleep." In line 4, an earthquake and clap of thunder have rendered Dante unconscious. We would expect him to awaken frightened and full of anxiety, but the contrary seems to be true. Dante's rested eyes are an image of the refreshment our souls receive from being acted upon by the divine power. We see here a metaphor of activity in the spiritual life. While Dante rests, God transports him over the river. Real spiritual progress is made, and it is God who initiates it. Again, sound is the first impression Dante receives. He hears the roar of endless woe before he sees anything. In line 10, hell appears to the viewer as a bottomless pit. Evil is like that. It is dark and without a true focus. Heaven is light and has God at its center. Hell is dark, and peering into it, we see nothing at all. True evil is as close to nothingness as a being can get. Here, that darkness and emptiness is more than an image. It is a physical reality for Dante. They descend into a blind world. Blind because of the absence of that vision that makes us blessed. Like darkness itself, hell manages to be both immense and still claustrophobic. One of the great challenges in the spiritual life is our own lack of perspective. We seem to have 20/20 vision when examining the faults of others, but curious blind spots about our own. We are often unable to identify the plank in our own eye. And this is precisely why even experienced spiritual directors need a spiritual director. They might be able to produce helpful books on spiritual subjects or guide many on the pathway to holiness. But the one person about whom they lack an objective point of view of is themselves. Now, how frail is Dante's newfound courage? He glances over at Virgil and sees him going pale. Now, if his guide is afraid, what hope is there for Dante? But we'll see that Virgil isn't afraid. He's overcome with compassion. Virgil reacts to this circle in an intensely personal way. For Virgil, this circle is not merely an objective place to be visited and understood, as though he were, for Dante's benefit, doing a philosophical survey of the meaning of hell and all of its parts. This circle is his circle, the place to which Virgil has been consigned for all eternity. These people are his people, his fellow sufferers. He tells Dante that his paleness is pity you have taken to be fear. Where there is so obviously self-interest, we should be careful not to take the narrator's word as objective truth. Virgil has a stake in this circle. His explanation might very well include much that is more self-justification than detached description. Virgil's paleness is another example of that literary technique Dante uses very consistently, what we can call anticipatory imagery. Even before the narrative turns to a new subject, the imagery is already preparing the reader for what he is about to encounter. Before we even enter into limbo, we know that something is up, and something that involves Virgil personally. The imagery has done its work, even before the story has begun to be told. In line 26, here in limbo, the atmosphere of hell changes dramatically. Sound is what Dante first notices, and that sound is noticeably different. There's no wailing and crying out here, but merely sighs arising from sorrow without punishment. Here, too, there are children and infants. Dante, as will become clearer, has blended together three different ideas of limbo. One, a church dogma, one, a common theological opinion, and another of Dante's own invention. The first is the limbus patrum, which is limbo of the fathers, the bosom of Abraham, that place of waiting to which the faithful ones before Christ's coming were consigned until his saving death. Because the price of their sins had not yet been paid, these faithful souls had to await Christ's saving death. After his death and before the resurrection, our Lord descends to the underworld, the bosom of Abraham, to free the just who had gone before him. Once Christ descended to them, this place of waiting no longer had a function. If it is still a place, it would be an empty place. The second idea of limbo that Dante incorporates here is limbus infantium, limbo of children. The limbo, which some theologians had speculated was the fate of unbaptized babies. There was never an official dogma of the Church, but was a common opinion of respected theologians. Recently, high-ranking people in the Church, including Pope Benedict XVI, have called this notion of limbo into question, saying that we can only entrust the souls of unbaptized babies into the merciful hands of God. A hopeful place to be. As regards children who have died without baptism, the Church can only entrust them to the mercy of God, as she does in her funeral rites for them. Indeed, the great mercy of God who desires that all men should be saved, and Jesus' tenderness towards children, allow us to hope that there is a way of salvation for children who have died without baptism. The third idea of limbo is the limbo of the virtuous pagans, a place for those who live lives of virtue, but only natural virtue. This aspect of limbo is Dante's own contribution, so we must be careful in how we interpret the narrative about it. Our only explanation for it comes from Virgil, as he is not necessarily an objective witness. The reader must listen critically to his words about limbo. Here, unlike elsewhere, it is Virgil who takes the initiative. Virgil seems to be eager for the chance to explain his own place for eternity, to give an apologia for his own life. But is Virgil, who otherwise services as the voice of reason, truly objective when he describes his own eternal fate? Commentators often seem to take Virgil's word as gospel truth, to view him in the role of the omniscient narrator. But Dante's writing seems to send subtle images and signals that provide contradictory messages. Be on the lookout for those signals, and you won't have to wait for long. In line 34, Virgil says, "They did not sin." And Virgil seems to be saying that the souls in limbo are there only because of a sort of personal bad luck, having been born at the wrong time. They had merits, but these weren't enough without baptism. And for this falling short and for no crime, these souls are sentenced to eternity in limbo. It is tempting to be sympathetic. Virgil is very persuasive. But balanced against Virgil's words is a very basic fact of geography that could easily go unnoticed. According to Dante's description of limbo, they are in hell. The first circle of hell, to be precise, not outside like the neutrals, but on the wrong side of the river. In addition, Virgil, When he first met Dante in Canto 1, in line 125, he described himself as a rebel against God's law. And here in Canto 4, he says, they did not give God homage as they ought. Isn't that a fault or a sin, even for the soul without grace? Honoring God is part of the natural law. This honor is a debt of gratitude to the being who made both you and the universe in which you dwell, which any human being is obliged to obey, even though baptism wasn't available to him. So are these pagans innocent victims or rebels? And what sort of merit could they have if they did not have grace? Dante asks, has anyone ever left here? Here again, Dante suggests that Virgil's description of the reason these souls are in limbo isn't what it seems to be. There have been many souls who were here, unbaptized souls, who were released at Christ's descent to the dead. These souls were saved without the actual sacrament of baptism. They made it to heaven even though they were born before the time of Christ. God must have provided a way for them to be saved. Since he wills the salvation of all, salvation must be somehow possible for all. We cannot say that God wills what is impossible. If there was no way for Virgil and his fellow pagans to be saved, would the fault for that belong to God because he refused to will to make it possible? There must be some reason other than that. Just the lack of baptism for Virgil's being here. Does Virgil sense Dante's suspicion? Dante's gentle reminder of Christ's descent to the dead and the release of the holy souls from the bosom of Abraham leads Virgil to give his own account of the event. It is as though the truth is slowly being pulled from him. Who is guiding whom here? There is a long list of souls who were delivered. We were merely told that he made them blessed. So the accident of being born before Christ is not an impediment to heaven, after all. The gates of heaven were not open until the Paschal mystery was complete, and this is why the souls of the righteous had to wait for Christ. Their salvation was based on a spiritual sort of IOU. Atonement needed to be made for their sins, and that atonement was made by the passion and death of Christ. He makes good those IOUs with his saving death. The price had to be paid. Justice requires it. There is no denying the great value of human accomplishments. We are made in the image of God, and every act of the intellect that contributes to the building up of this world is a light that shines in the darkness. The Church bestows its blessing upon human endeavors. We ask for God's blessings upon human labor, in which our Lord himself participated in the Holy Family, and upon the arts that we hope will raise the spirits of those who witness them, and upon those who govern society that they may foster the peace. Every human act done in accordance with reason is spiritually precious, a preparation and foundation for the building up of God's supernatural kingdom. In line 68, we see a ring of light quelling the darkness that surrounded it. Here we see in a visible way the splendor of the light of reason, glowing even here in hell, the only place in hell where the light overcomes the natural darkness of the pit. Elsewhere in hell, there will be other flames burning, in fact, plenty of flames burning, but none that really illuminates the surroundings. These hellish flames burn without providing real light. Here, in this illuminated bubble, we'll find souls who were preeminent in human learning in all its branches. Their light, even though it was merely a natural light, shone on their lives and the lives of those around them. And Virgil is given a special status here, special even in that circle of the great poets of the classical world. This isn't just an expression of Dante's hero worship. Virgil is seen both as a witness to the classical world and reason, but also a sort of prophet of the coming Messiah. In fact, his poetry, the eclogues, had been seen by many to foreshadow the virgin birth. He is a sort of bridge between reason and faith, almost a pagan prophet. And there is no false modesty in Virgil. He says, "They do me honor, and in this do well." He recognizes the gifts he has been given and is not surprised when others recognize them as well. Virgil is in fact a part of a very elite group of poets. Dante is now included as a worthy member, a sixth in their band. Here he is included, along with Virgil, in the company of Homer, Horace, Ovid, and Lucan. Perhaps not the most modest of things for Dante himself to write, but it shows that Dante sees himself as a true successor to the classical poets, a real Renaissance man, and mirrors the same recognition of gifts that Virgil had. To pretend that we have not received great gifts when we, in fact, have, seems ungrateful. Even Our Lady, that picture of humility, acknowledges that the Almighty has done great things for me. In line 106, again, there's an image of a castle. This castle seems to be the home of true reason, fully lived humanity, at least in its natural state. Note that there are 7 walls and 7 gates. I think both of these represent the same reality. The 7 liberal arts comprised of the trivium, grammar, logic, and rhetoric, and the quadrivium, arithmetic, geometry, astronomy, and music. This learning serves both as a defense of humanity against attack from what is less than fully human, the walls, as well as means of entering into the true core of that humanity, the gates. The poets seem to walk on water, as the line in 109 says, "Over this stream we passed as on dry land." The power of their reason grants them a regal dominion over the material world. The green field shows the fertility of human thought and contrasts strongly with the desolate landscape in the rest of hell. In line 114, it said, "Seldom they spoke and held their voices low." Because true wisdom is deliberate and slow to speak. It doesn't push itself forward. Wisdom doesn't have a marketing department. Silence is an important part of, and an important preparation for, the wisdom that is praised here. Silence helps to make them wise, and wisdom helps to keep them silent. Without taking anything away from the splendor of human reason and its accomplishments, we are still reminded in countless little ways that human beings are created for something even more dignified. St. Augustine felt that yearning for God, a yearning that arises from the fact that we are created by God and for God. And because of that, we are created. Our hearts cannot rest except in their Creator. In line 120, Dante exclaims, "Glory it is to see what I have seen." There is no denying the glory of reason in its natural state. Dante's description of it literally glows. He feels honored to walk in the presence of the greatest poets in history. But we notice that something is missing. Some spark we expect among such noble souls and do not even see. Even in the souls of these 4 great poets, there was neither joy nor sadness in their eyes. At the center of a sort of who's who of the classical world stands the master of all those who know, Aristotle, who possesses the greatest epithet I can imagine, at least in the natural realm. Closest to him are Plato and Socrates, then the other Greek thinkers. Perhaps because of their association with Aristotle, the Arabic philosophers Avicenna and Averroes are included here, even though they are clearly after the coming of Christ. Their inclusion here seems to point to a broader idea of pagan, encompassing those who didn't have the Christian faith or the fullness of the faith, but who followed the precepts of reason faithfully. Why are they included here while other followers of Islam find themselves with the schismatics? Dante seems to consider these Arabic philosophers more Aristotelian than Muslim, a judgment in which certainly many of their contemporary Muslim theologians would concur, especially in the case of Averroes, who was condemned by them for his stand on the independence of reason from faith. 151, now leaving limbo, we enter into a place where nothing ever shines, in contrast to the ring of light we found in limbo. Here in hell, each particular sin, each in its own distinctive way, obscures the light of reason. We'll be brought back to this way of thinking of sin over and over again in Inferno. Sin is not merely an offense against God and his commandments, but against our own reason and our humanity. This is also why Virgil is a fitting guide to hell. Not only is he a resident, but he also stands for reason, and reason is precisely what sin destroys. What better person could there be than to present that destruction for us?